In 480 BC, the Persian Empire launched a massive invasion of Greece. At a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae, a coalition of Greek soldiers stood in its way. Among them were 300 Spartans, commanded by their king, Leonidas. But the famous story is often simplified. The Spartans were not alone. Thousands of Greek soldiers initially defended the pass, including 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans. For 3 days, the Greeks resisted a vastly larger Persian force. They ultimately lost the battle, but Thermopylae became one of the most remembered battles of the ancient world. To understand Thermopylae, we first need to understand Greece itself. In the early 5th century BC, Greece was not a single unified country. It was divided into many independent city-states, including Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, and dozens of smaller communities. These city-states frequently competed with one another, but the Persian Empire was different. It was one of the largest political powers of the ancient world, stretching across enormous territories in Asia and into parts of Europe. In 490 BC, Persian forces invaded Greece and were defeated by the Athenians at Marathon. 10 years later, Persian King Xerxes launched a much larger invasion. His objective was to bring the Greek city-states under Persian control. The Greeks knew they could not match Persia in numbers on open ground, so they looked for geography that could reduce the Persian advantage. They found it at Thermopylae. The name means hot gates, referring to the area's hot springs. In 480 BC, the pass was much narrower than it is today. Mountains rose on one side, while the sea lay nearby. It was an ideal defensive position. A large army could not simply spread out and surround a smaller force there. The Greek strategy was connected to another battlefield as well. While soldiers defended Thermopylae on land, Greek naval forces confronted the Persian fleet near Artemisium. The goal was not to defeat Persia immediately. It was to slow the invasion and give the other Greek states time to prepare. The Greek force at Thermopylae was much larger than the famous number 300 suggests. The Spartan contingent consisted of 300 hoplites, but they were joined by soldiers from several other Greek communities. There were hundreds of Thespians, hundreds of Thebans, and thousands of other Greek soldiers. Leonidas, the Spartan king, commanded the coalition. The Greek soldiers fought using the hoplite system. Each soldier carried a large shield and spear and fought as part of a tightly organized formation called a phalanx. The narrow terrain made this formation especially effective. The Persians could not bring their entire numerical advantage at the Greeks at once. The first attacks failed to break the Greek position. Persian elite troops were then sent forward. They also struggled to force their way through the narrow pass. For the Greeks, the terrain was doing much of the work. But the situation changed when a local Greek named Ephialtes revealed a mountain path that could take Persian troops around the Greek position. The path allowed Persian forces to approach the Greeks from behind.
Once Leonidas learned what had happened, the Greek position could no longer be held indefinitely. The exact reasoning behind Leonidas's final decision remains debated. What is clear is that most of the Greek force withdrew. Leonidas remained with the 300 Spartans, but they were not the only soldiers who stayed. Around 700 Thespians also remained and fought alongside them. A contingent of Thebans was there as well, although the ancient sources give a complicated account of their role. This is one of the most important details the popular version often leaves out. Thermopylae was not simply 300 Spartans against an enormous army. It was a final stand involving several Greek communities, with the Spartans becoming the most famous part of the story. On the third day, Persian forces attacked from both directions. The Greeks were surrounded. Leonidas was killed during the fighting, and the remaining defenders eventually withdrew to a smaller position. Ancient accounts describe the final Greek resistance ending under a massive attack from Persian archers. The Persians won Thermopylae. The Greek defensive line had been broken. Xerxes continued south. Athens was evacuated, and Persian forces eventually entered the city. For a moment, the Persian invasion appeared unstoppable. But Thermopylae had not been fought in isolation. The Greek fleet had also been resisting the Persian navy, and the fighting at Thermopylae was part of a larger defensive strategy. Only weeks later, the Greeks won a major naval victory at Salamis. The Persian position became increasingly difficult to sustain. The following year, Greek forces defeated the remaining Persian army at Plataea. The invasion had failed to conquer Greece. So what actually made Thermopylae important? Not the idea that 300 men single-handedly saved Western civilization. That is a dramatic later interpretation, not a simple historical fact. Its importance comes from something more concrete. The battle demonstrated how geography, discipline, organization, and cooperation could allow a much smaller force to resist a vastly larger one. It also became a powerful symbol in later Greek historical memory. And the story was never really just about Sparta. The 700 Thespians who stayed and fought alongside the Spartans deserve to be remembered as well. Thermopylae was ultimately a defeat for the Greeks. But defeat did not mean the end of the Greek resistance. The Persian army moved through Greece, the Greek coalition regrouped, and the invasion that had begun with enormous confidence eventually failed. The 300 Spartans became the most famous symbol of Thermopylae, but behind that number was a much larger story. Thousands of soldiers, several Greek communities, difficult strategic decisions, and a battle remembered for more than 2,000 years. Thermopylae was not a story of supernatural heroes or an effortless victory. It was a story of human beings making difficult decisions during a dangerous moment in history, and that is precisely why the battle endured. If this gave you a new way of seeing the Battle of Thermopylae, subscribe, because every week we look beyond the famous version of history and uncover the story behind it.